But several people have pointed out over the last day that the Democrats have the advantage in the fiscal cliff. Is there any possibility that you would go over it in order to force action if necessary?
Well, there's no desire to go over the fiscal cliff.
But is there any possibility you would?
Well, there's always a risk. I mean, there's a risk that we would go over the fiscal cliff. There are two parts to the fiscal cliff, as you know. One is the sequester piece. I believe there's a very decent chance we can resolve that piece because there's universal agreement that it's a bad idea to have these across-the-board indiscriminate cuts. And if you look at the amount of deficit savings over a year, you're talking about $110 billion, $55 billion defense, $55 billion non-defense. It seems to me we could come up with an alternative way to achieve that deficit reduction within the budget window. So that's one piece. The tax piece gets tougher because we also have the objective of beginning to reduce the deficit in a balanced way. I happen to support the framework of Simpson-Bowles in terms of their revenues and cuts and the ratio of revenue to cuts. And if you look at the Simpson-Bowles framework, their starting point presumes the amount of revenue you would achieve if you allowed the top rate to go back to 39%, the Clinton-era levels. That's the starting point for Simpson-Bowles in terms of their revenue. That's in their baseline. And then they raise revenue on top of that. So as we approach this challenge, which is the long-term deficit reduction plan, my view is we should make sure we get that kind of mix of both cuts and revenue. And I'm open to looking at all different ways of getting there, but it gets really hard to achieve that result if you box yourself in from the beginning.
But what you've heard over the last couple of days from Republicans is a willingness to see tax revenues from high-income people rise, but preference not to do it with tax rates. You know, do it with deductions. I saw you quoted in some paper that I can't think of the name of right now, this morning saying you want both. I mean, you've got a Republican movement on the tax issue. Do you really have to hit both deductions for high-income people and rates for high-income people?
Well, what we need ultimately is the mix of revenues and cuts that you see in Simpson-Bowles. So I think we should look at tax reform. The issue is how do you do tax reform in a way that eliminates preferences and other things that we could, prune out of the tax code, but also accomplishes the other objective in Simpson-Bowles, which is to achieve deficit reduction in a balanced way. And so, again, if someone has another idea of how to achieve the total amount of revenue in Simpson-Bowles that they presume in order to meet their deficit reduction targets. I mean, I think Simpson-Bowles did a great job in laying out the framework. But if you look at the deficit reduction numbers that they hit, which we all thought was a good, aggressive target.
$1 trillion over 10 years.
No.
Oh, the deficit, $4 trillion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but if you look at both the debt to GDP ratio and you look at where they got the deficit on an annual basis relative to GDP, in getting there, they assumed this additional revenue that we're talking about. So it seems to me we should put our heads together and figure out how we get the revenue that is projected to come in through Simpson-Bowles and their whole plan, as well as the cuts that they
Okay, so let's